Doing a lot of writing yesterday. I wear this robe not to impress anybody, but it's very comfortable. It's made out of hemp. I made it myself. What do you think, huh? It's very comfortable. Breathes really well. I didn't know that about hemp, that it breathes really well, even better than cotton, apparently. I made this custom holster for a person. It's covered in alligator. What do you think? This is a $500 holster, by the way. There's about, believe it or not, there's like 3.5 hours of labor in it. But before that, there's like an hour and a half of getting the pattern perfect, and that's what people don't see. They see, well, it's got like $110 of alligator on it. And there's a lot of labor, a lot of sanding and a lot of applying of edge coat. But yeah, it's like, people always have the question, like, why does leather work cost so much? It's like, well, you have to have a lot of machinery, you have to have at least a decade or two of skills, and then you have to pattern it to, design it correct. Anyway, we always ask the questions of why things cost so much. By the way, I moved one of my sewing machines over here, if you're wondering what that brownish red contraption is. Yeah. Not that I actually do jigsaw puzzles, but if you ever strewn out pieces of a jigsaw puzzle, which a lot of us have actually done when we were younger, yeah, laid them out, and you're like, oh my God, look at all these pieces. It's ridiculous. And of course you try to put it together, and then you see the picture once it's done. It's like, well, that's really simple. And the further we are from something that we're looking for, the further away we are from the source, the more complicated things become. Infinite possibilities only speaks about the world of phenomena. The reason why highly intelligent people go crazy is because they try to stick too many facts in their head. There's one of the many reasons actually why they go nuts. They could see trying to take account of all the minutiae and the details and the things that are perpetually in flux, but they should be working their way back. And a lot of people actually drive themselves nuts in life, looking at all the phenomena in life and trying to keep on top of it. And of course, it's important to take life seriously, but not so seriously because nobody's going to get out of this life alive, obviously, is the case. I wanted to talk about the impossible. Something that's incredibly impossible, completely contrary to facts, logic, and wisdom, and yet it's the very thing that's taught in every school and college today. Yeah, and I think kids are bombarded by too much garbage. They play too many video games, and they try to, schools especially, which are really horrible so far as what they do to kids, fill their heads with too much facts and garbage. Kids need to be taught how to learn, not cramming their heads full of a bunch of foolish facts that they could get off of their phone. Everybody has a cell phone now, including kids. And I know if the power goes out, then, you're stuck. You're someplace where you don't have a signal. You can't get the information that you need. But generally, even the deepest recesses of Death Valley, California, you can get a cell phone signal, right? So, all the useless facts and minutia that people fill their heads with, which is completely unnecessary. The reason why some of these incredibly brilliant authors, like John Scorsese, who wrote the Periphesian, which everybody and every child, even though a child can't really wrap their mind around the Periphesian, should be reading. The reason why these people are so incredibly intelligent. Roger Boscovich, who wrote Theoria Philosophiae Naturalis, Theory of Natural Philosophy. Most people's brains melt when they try to read a page or two of that. And nobody really asks the question, what is it that these people were learning back then? Because nobody today, no matter how high their IQ is, and I take no stock in IQ, because IQ doesn't test for anything important, like creativity, spontaneous thought genesis, the ability of problem solving. They just don't. This is a test of empirical data and memorization. IQ tests do not test. Some of the most unwise and stupid people I've ever met have had incredibly high IQs. Let me ask themselves the question, what do these people learn and study? Well, they learned how to learn. They didn't fill their heads full of endless facts. It's important to know things, fundamental things. But 80% of anybody's learning needs to be methodology of how to think. how to problem solve, the lost art of retroduction, which the last time that was actually taught was basically not long after the Dark Ages. And there was a few glimmers of it there in the 14th through the 16th century, but almost none. And now it doesn't exist anymore at all. I'd like to talk about something that every branch of modern science and every field theoretician, oh, I have a PhD in theoretical physics. Good for you. Who cares? You just memorized a bunch of garbage and took a bunch of tests and agree with stuff. They all teach us that the universe in this world at large is composed of many countless things. We have electricity, and we have dielectricity, we have gravity, we have magnetism, we have the weak force, the strong force, the nuclear force, gravity, electromagnetism. Over here we have ice, water, and steam. Different types of being, existence, the countless things that we think that are in the universe. We have a particle for everything, and of course, if you're a hammer, everything's a nail, and if you're an atomist, everything's a particle. I've humorously and accurately called this the cult of bumping particles, which is exactly what it is. These people teach atomism, and they think that nature is comprised of all these different things. However, fundamentally, there's a certain section of these people that have said, well, ultimately we're going to come up with a grand unified theory. You know, all these things must be linked somehow. And that's a glimmer of hope. But we can't posit the impossible to humanity and say there's all of this over here and there's that over there. And this is not true. It doesn't follow Occam's razor. It doesn't follow facts, logic, and wisdom. It complicates the universe, which is incredibly simplex. The closer somebody is to the center, the more simple things become. The further away from the center, that being wisdom, of course, and understanding. In other words, you can see further by standing higher. To be higher and closer to proximity to the center of wherever we are in this world, we see, you know, electricity here, magnetism there. All these different things in nature, these are not different things. Human beings love to pigeonhole things and give things different names. I keep using the one, ice, water, and steam, which of course are all different modalities of water. But there are not many things in the universe. There's just not. Fundamentally, of course, this gave rise to countless forms of creationism, religious belief, and I don't care what anybody's beliefs are. I'm not trying to convince anybody of anything. This idea of fundamental sin or original sin, you know, is something ab extra to the good or the one or God, you know, being of infinite wisdom, you know, who inadvertently created beings that were given free will, and yet he was somehow stunned or pissed off that these beings made a choice. It's completely ludicrous. It's completely asinine. This is a misunderstanding. People say, well, you know, you're either an atheist or you're a creationist. They literally think and have been taught that there's only these two things in the world, some form of Judeo-Christianity or any other religious belief system, or you're a materialist slash atheist slash nihilist, all of which, by the way, are one and the same thing, because no true atheist is also, too, not a metaphysical atheist. Atheism has nothing to do with its original denotation by the Greeks. Philebus 29d, the first mention of atheos, has nothing to do with God or the absence of God. It has to do with the denial of subjective principles or substrates underneath phenomena. Fundamentally, a true atheist, forgetting about God, which people think atheism has to do with denial of God. Connotatively it does, and please don't ever, ever, ever call me an atheist. That's accurate, but what a true atheist is a person who denies the hand underneath the sock puppet, if you will. They see the mirage, but they don't see that which gives rise to the mirage. They think everything is a mirage and that life is happenstance, like, you know, a bunch of poofling and monkeys given enough time pounding on typewriters in a locked room will, given enough time, produce 12-volume set of Shakespearean literature or a 30-volume set of the Encyclopedia Britannica, which of course is completely ludicrous, and that's what these people posit. And they ludicrously posit something way more ridiculous found in any religious text. You know, anybody with a half a brain knows, you know, the absurdities and insanities found within any religious text. What they do is they'll say something where, well, they try to explain life away. Well, obviously, nothing here could give rise. What happened is it came from somewhere else. So what they do is they engage in this displacement fallacy, which is way more crazy than anything ever found in any religious text. Aliens brought it over. Bacteria hitched a ride on a meteorite and came to Earth. It came from somewhere. So they displaced the ultimate questions that any true seeker would have. But the point being, and I kind of humorously remark about Mother Nature being a hairy armpit, dreadlock chick, with muddy feet and a hemp skirt. But keeping things more rational and more on point is that it is impossible for nature and mechanics to operate with the ideas that we have of, different modalities of energy. There are not different modalities of, these separate entities. Well, electricity is over here, gravity is over here, magnetism is over here. I mean, I've completely dismissed that entirely over countless videos. Magnetism is a dielectric field, loss of energy or inertia. So-called gravity is point non-specific mutual mass acceleration. Electricity is substantially so, not my idea, that of Charles Proteus Steinmetz, and accurately so, and way more brilliant than Nikola Tesla, actually. Just the hybrid energy modality of dielectricity and magnetism operating in a cyclic rate together as a type of energy modality form, that which we call electricity. Even he himself said in his 1917 book that people had completely misunderstood what electricity is and overcomplicated it. That's kind of brilliant for a book published a little over 100 years ago. What was it, 105 years ago? 106 years ago? Anyway, actually getting to the point of this on the impossible. The notion that there are these many things such as dielectricity and magnetism. Well, ignorance itself sees many things in the world. Electricity, gravity here, different types of particles. Mother Nature cannot have many types of particles. There's not a proton and a neutron, an electron and a boson and a Higgs field. It's just completely ludicrous. If you're an atomist, that sounds rational, even though it's complete insanity. If super advanced aliens are like 1 million more years, they would land and think we're all nuts. Thinking that nature is composed of these different types of particles. There's not. Even the scientists that I don't agree with will tell you that a free neutron spontaneously becomes, go look that up if you don't believe me, spontaneously becomes a proton after it's released from the nucleus due to radiation or whatever, splits up an atom. Usually it's a radioactive element. Well, if that's the case, then that which we call a neutron is just an energy modality of a proton. Every brilliant field theorist said that there's no such thing as an electron particle. It's completely ludicrous, this idea of a charge-carrying particle. I've done countless videos on it. Tesla said there's no such thing as an electron particle. Dollard, Heaviside, Maxwell. It's completely ridiculous, that charge and discharge or the flow of electrons. Well, you could never, ever, and all science, is energy transfer the flow of electrons? Yes, and all it says is flow of electrons. Well, what about wireless power induction in a vacuum? That completely dismisses your particle theory nonsense. Well, in that case, we have lines of force where we have induction. What do you mean? Lines of what? Energy. No branch of science ever defined energy, sir. Well, here's what is happening. It's the lines of force. Well, force of what, by what, and upon what. See, there's no such thing as a line in nature. Of course, we see constructive and destructive interference. No branch of science ever defined energy. And force is not a thing itself, neither is a wave. A wave of what? Waves of what? A wave is not a thing, rather what something does. Force of what, by what, and upon what. So ignorance sees many things. And these people that think they're so brilliant with PhDs and, hey, I'm professor of theoretical physics at the University of Bada Bing. Good for you. You've just told and been teaching everybody for 30 years that Mother Nature and rational physics, and physics is just the objective side of metaphysics, which is the subjective side. Objective and subjective side, they're both different sides of the exact same coin, both of which ultimate truth is the silver in between, right? Physics, metaphysics, there's ultimate truth, which would be understanding the nature of the silver of the coinage, if you will. And I've only ever, my entire life, been interested in not this or that, but what's here. Because when you understand the silver, nobody cares about the head or the tail. You know, if you have the silver, you can print out all the coins you want. Nobody has a head side of a coin or a tail side of a coin. Why are you interested in it? They're just impressions of the silver. Is that not the case? Well, of course it is the case. There are not many things in nature or cosmic mechanics. It's irrational, it's absurd, it's illogical, it violates Occam's razor. There's no such thing as electricity versus magnetism or gravity versus electricity. There's no such thing as so-called electromagnetism. Sure there is. Transverse electromagnetic modality measures frequency wavelength of the energy form. Well, you can't define energy. And a frequency is a modulation of something, just like a wave. A wave of what? A force of what? Force! Lines of force! I love it when scientists, they love talking about waves and they love talking about force. And they love talking about lines. Lines? A line of what? A force of what? A force of something, by something, upon something else. Of, by, and upon. There's no such thing as force itself. Here's force! Like, no. There's no such thing as force. You can't point to force. You can't point to a wave without pointing to something else that's under modulation or waving, i.e. a given frequency or wavelength. Rational physics ultimately must necessitatively come to a single point or a center. Does the center hold? And regarding the idea that there is these many things in nature, the center doesn't hold. It can't hold. It's completely impossible. Wisdom sees very, very few things. Ultimately, it only sees one thing. Or rather, one thing expressed under different modalities of itself. All the confusion about nature comes from the misapprehension of that which is most simple and transcendent, i.e. the absolute, which is principle and attribute, which are not two different things, like light and illumination. Illumination technically is what human beings speak of regarding light. Nobody ever sees the principle of light. It sounds like I'm splitting hairs, but I'm not. This idea of evil. What is evil? Evil will be a privation of that which is good or transcendent, not a thing in itself, because there's no such thing as a shadow. Shadow is not a thing at all. A shadow is an absence of light. Space is no different than a shadow. Space is not a thing either. These relativists and these quantum theoreticians have reified, built up, a sandcastle out of unicorn farts and leprechaun gold. In other words, things that don't exist. Space has no properties. The only time I point this out to people, everybody loves to quote Tesla, but they never ever, I'm the only person I know of that's ever pointed out the fact that the only time Tesla nearly foams at the mouth, again and again and again, is the idea that space has properties and it acts upon things and does things or interacts with other things. He says it's completely impossible. Space is no different than a shadow. Space is the after effect of a divergent toroidal magnetic field, i.e. the centrifugal force and motion vector from the release of energy or inertia of the dielectric. And why does inertia or dielectric, or even the good, and that which the good does, which is also to the good, or light and elimination, dielectricity and magnetism, why is there a release of energy at all? Why is there anything rather than nothing? Is because that which is most transcendent and most simple, whether you consider it to be light, dielectricity, the one, i.e. the absolute, i.e. the agathon, has at least one attribute, and that which is the attribute is no different than the principle, except it is the expression of the principle. And boy, you can make a lot of videos about that. Light and illumination, the good and what the good does, i.e. the good. It's not doing something. The old ancient passage from the Vedas, Advaita Vedanta, original Buddhism, and I stress original, is the unmoved mover. Yeah, kind of like the hub of the wheel. that from which movement is reliant, but itself is the unmoved mover. No different than light and illumination, no difference than the one and the one, or the good and the good. So, everything that you and I and all the kids were taught is completely impossible. There are not these many things in nature. It is antithetical to wisdom, and it is definitely an ultimate truth. And it's something which people are not taught. And to a sense, it has actually made people nuts. There are many reasons people are nuts today. Excessive materialism, the demonic foods we consume, and the microwaved mac and cheese. Soda pop, microwave mac and cheese, on and on and on and on. I used to like mac and cheese. But the idea that nature is so complicated, there's all this stuff in life, and there's not. Everything is reducible to one thing. Everything else is just a modality expression of that one, kind of like ice, water, and steam. People need to stop complicating the universe and see things more simply. But to see things simply, you actually have to have wisdom. And wisdom is just a BS, fancy, nonsense word, like ice is a nonsense word relative to cold water. Ice, yeah. Wisdom is just a BS word to refer to self-proximity. They'll say, what's self-proximity? I say, what's the opposite of dilution? What would self-proximity be? And then we must ask the question, what's the methodology of self-proximity? And that's the reason why these people are so intelligent. They engaged in retroduction or apophatism, i.e. via negativa, also too called neti-neti or apophatism. All these different words refer to one and the same thing, the methodology of THEURGY. Retroduction, neti-neti, via negativa, apophatism, disobjectification. They all mean the exact same thing. Theurgy of disobjectification. Disobjectification leads to subjective synthesis. And the more that's engaged, the greater self-proximity or so-called wisdom one has, the more simple things become. There's not electricity versus magnetism versus dielectricity. There's not, protons versus neutrons versus... Completely ludicrous. Turns out that matter fundamentally is just super, super high energy light. Isn't that neat? And light is an energy modality. It's a coaxial circuit specifically. It is a semi-stable coaxial circuit energy modality. It's really rather simple. Kind of hard to explain. Not really. Anyway, I scoff at all these science books I've collected over the year. I didn't really collect them. I always knew they were full of nonsense, and they are. Talking about all these different things, and really everything is a lot more simple than that. But one does have to have wisdom to be able to see it. You just can't tell someone it's simple. Okay, it's simple, he said. You actually have to see it for yourself. Seeing it for yourself is actually incredibly important. Anyway, hope I didn't ramble on too long in this video. Thanks so much for watching. Have a lovely weekend. This robe is really comfy. That's why I wear it. Goodbye.